Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be giving you recommendations for classics that are beginner friendly. I have definitely noticed a trend. I hope it's not a trend, but I have definitely noticed that more and more people are wanting to pick up classics, which I always think is a positive thing. And so today I thought I'd recommend a couple of books that I think are very beginner friendly and are a good way to start your journey. So the first book that I'm going to recommend is an oldie but a goodie, and it is one of my favorite books of all time. People who've been watching my channel for a while now will definitely know what this book is, and that is The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. A lot of people typically recommend The Count of Monte Cristo, which I have read most of that book. I have to finish it though, and I will definitely be picking it up this year. And while I agree that it is very easy to read, I think what I love about The Three Musketeers is just like how fun it is. The Three Musketeers essentially follows our main character D'Artagnan as he essentially befriends the Musketeers and he has to fulfill a particular mission. There is a little bit of everything in this book. There's romance, there's adventure, there's action, there's fighting and battles, there's political intrigue, there's themes around religion, like there's literally things about everything in this book, and it's just such a fun time. And I think often classics can feel a bit dry, they can feel a bit dense, but with Dumas, because his writing is just so fun, you can't help but just completely get swept away by the ride. It's just so fun, and I wish more and more people would read this as one of their first classics, because I truly believe it's almost like a gateway drug. Like, it's very addictive, and it opened up my world even more after I read this book to classics, and I will be forever grateful to Alexandre Dumas for doing that. The next one on my list is a Russian author, and this Russian author in particular is very much a heavy hitter, and I haven't read any of his longer stuff, but this was my first work of his that I read, and I absolutely fell in love with his writing. And I particularly fell in love with how he talks about the human condition. And that is The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. This is a short story. It's like, I think it's like 100 pages. I read it in like 1 or 2 sittings. And we're essentially following our main character as he kind of faces a very severe illness. You're in his head and you're kind of hearing him rationalize what's happening in his life in a way that people who are healthy just don't. I think when you're faced with your own mortality, you look at the world through a very different lens. And as somebody who has gone through periods of where I have been extremely unwell, this was like the only book that really echoed how I felt, and it was the only book that was really able to kind of get me through what was quite a dark period of my life. And I'm super grateful to Tolstoy for that, because often when you are an unwell person, people are constantly telling you how it's going to be okay. People are constantly telling you how everything will work out, but that's often the last thing you want to hear. Sometimes you just want to hear someone say like, yeah, this is crap, and I get what you're going through. And that's what this book was for me. It's very raw, it's very honest, and I think if you're somebody who has particularly gone through like a rough time with their health, then this is one that I would strongly recommend picking up. It's also quite easy to read in my opinion. Like I said, I haven't read any of Tolstoy's heftier stuff yet, but for me this was my first one, and as I said, I read it very quickly and I found it very addictive to read. The next one that I'm going to recommend is another oldie but a goodie, and I feel like this one does get recommended quite a lot, but I thought I would add it into my list regardless, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is a book following a whole host of characters as they essentially go through the trials and tribulations of getting married in the early 19th century. This is a book that just has some incredibly well-written characters, whether it's our main character Elizabeth Bennet, whether it's our main love interest in the form of William Darcy. Like, there's just such a great cast of like secondary characters and tertiary characters, and I think it gives a really great insight into a particular period of history where a woman's worth was basically determined by who she married. And with a Jane Austen book, you can be expected to have excellent writing, really, really beautiful prose, and just some absolutely fantastic dialogue that is very witty and has you laughing out loud. The next one I have on my list is another short one, and this is A Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. Now, Hemingway has written a lot, and this was my first Hemingway that I read, and to this day it's still my favorite Hemingway. And that's because this book does such an amazing job of like world building, and I'll come on to more about that in a second. But a Moveable Feast, we're essentially following our main character as he lives his life in Paris as an expat, as a journalist, and it's about his kind of struggle of living in Paris. And one of my favorite things about this book is how Paris is a character in itself, and I think that was my favorite thing about it, to be honest. Not just one of my favorite things, it was my favorite thing about it, because Paris feels alive. Now, as somebody who has been to Paris before, I think he captured the spirit of it so well, and I think there's a real sense of like you're there with the character, which I don't feel like that happens often for me, but for some reason it just really, really worked in this book. And it's probably because Hemingway himself spent quite a lot of time in Paris, and I believe this book is actually a memoir, so it is very much influenced by his own life. So seeing it through his own eyes is maybe adds another layer of intimacy to it, but I just think he captured the spirit of Paris so well. The other thing about this book that I really liked is how much it kind of kicks a punch. Like, it's such a short book. I read it in one sitting, but it moves very fast. Not because there's like a ton of stuff happening, but it's just because of the way that it's written. It's written so fluidly that you can't help to just keep reading it. And I think that's a testament to Hemingway's writing. And then there's also some really great thematic work. There's some really great exploration around like the struggle in one's life and like one's own career. There's also some really interesting discussion around like love and marriage. There's also some references to war and like the consequences of war on the average person who went to fight those wars. There's a lot punched into this tiny little book, and it is just really, really beautifully written. And then the final book that I'm going to recommend, and I will do another part to this because I have so many books to recommend. I will do like an intermediate one and an advanced one as well at some point, and then I might also focus on like more modern classics versus like older classics, so watch this space. But my last one has to be Little Women by Louisa M. Alcott. I loved this book growing up. I've read it like 2 or 3 times now, and you know, we're following 4 sisters essentially as they live their lives in like the 19th century. It's similar to Pride and Prejudice. It's covering themes around like the role of women in society, marriage, like also around like women wanting to have a profession, a career, and wanting to build their own lives for themselves, not just to have a husband and, you know, have children. The big difference though is that Little Women is set in the US, is set in Boston, whereas Pride and Prejudice is set in England, of course. I just think the characters are very heartwarming to read. Like, they all have their own very human struggles. They all feel like struggles that any normal person could have, even in the 21st century, though in some aspects to a lesser extent. But I just think she does such a good job of capturing the spirit of women and creating female characters that generally feel very likable, feel very relatable, and feel like people that not only we could know in our own lives, that we could also draw parallels to. One of my favourite characters of all time is from Little Women. It's because I used to identify with her quite a lot. I still do to some extent now, but not as much as I did when I was younger. But I think there's something really special about a book where you see, you know, a character or multiple characters in your own journey, and it just adds that extra level of emotion but also intimacy to the book. There's a lot of thematic work in this book. As I mentioned, there's a piece around like women, but there's also a piece around like class, money and wealth, and also like, again, the impacts of war on the average normal person. There's also some really interesting exploration around education and books and reading and the importance of intellectualism. And I think overall, like, it's just such a fantastic book. I have read the second one as well, Good Wives, and in my opinion, it's nowhere near as good as the first one. And also in my opinion, you don't really need to read that one to enjoy the first one. Like, just read it as a standalone. Like, it's fantastic. I mean, the second one is good, but it's just not as good as the first one, so do bear that in mind. But you don't have to read the second one in order to get what you want to get from the first book. It's so good, folks. Definitely pick it up because it's just such a warm hug, that book. And there have been a number of adaptations, but for me, the 1994 adaptation is the only one that you should watch. That adaptation is flawless. Winona Ryder as Jo is just one of my favourite characters. It's just so good, folks. So definitely consider checking it out. So those are 5 classics that I think are beginner friendly. I will do a second part to this particular one because I do have more. But then I will do some more videos as well, classics that maybe focus on a specific niche or that are more for advanced readers as well. If you have any particular requests, feel free to leave them down below. If you have any recommendations as well, either for myself or for others, answers, please do comment them down below and I will see you there. Thanks for watching, stay safe, take care, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye.